For those of you who are new, and I know there are a bunch of you who are coming today for the first time, welcome. Thank you for being here. Our aim is to make this a really impactful 1 hour of your time. You take away something that not only is valuable, but you can put to work immediately. These meetings, we run these webinars every month, and we actually have 2 every month. So they basically happen every second week. The first webinar each month is what we call our Living in Stride webinar, and that's where we choose a topic. It's on a quarterly rotation. So it's either to do with helping you understand more about you, understanding about leadership, you as a leader, or understanding team. And then we pick a theme. And in this meeting, we've picked the concept of what we call early warning signals. We'll get into that in a minute as the real secret to enjoying true success. When we have our next webinar in 2 weeks' time, that's what we call the ID Masterclass. And that's for people who really want to dig into the nuances of ID. It's the same topic, in this case, early warning signals, but we talk about it more holistically and with more use cases, and people also can bring their particular, challenges or issues around it to the table and use the brain power of the group to brainstorm different insights and solutions. Every session we record, so if you can't make a particular webinar, you're welcome to register anyway. And what that does is it allows you to automatically get a copy of the recording afterwards. So if anything comes up where you can't make it, know that you've got that as a fallback. But of course, it's great when you're here because you can not only participate in real life, but you can contribute your perspectives as well. So with that, let's get into the topic of what we call today the real secret to true success. And I just want to introduce this to you for a minute or so, and then we'll get into the early warning signals. But this concept of, what is the secret to success? Is it as simple as some people are born that way and some people therefore won't ever, enjoy true success? Is a person made, or are they already born that way, right? And no one wants to believe that it's purely natural, because no matter what the nature is, there's all sorts of things you can do in your life that could help change what might be natural. And not just being natural instincts, but I mean, even the family you are born into, the environment that you're born into. It may not be one that is a positive environment around you, but does that mean that your life is therefore labeled as sub-optimized, or can you do something about it? Of course you can do something about it. And there are all sorts of tools, techniques, and formulas that people, long before my time, have talked about to be truly successful. You've got to have regular exercise. You've got to eat well. You've got to sleep well. Like, you've got to take care of the physicality of who you are. And then, of course, there's all sorts of things around, being a positive person and learning to have a positive perspective and to always look at the glass as half full, no matter how empty it might be. There are all sorts of things that we would call that attitude or perspective that people over time have tried to really, master as well. When you look back, those of us who are a little older, when you look back over the years, the concept of having a natural way of operating didn't even exist 30 years ago. Back then, the concept of success was really simple. You work hard, you take care of yourself, and you've got to stay motivated. You've got to find a way to motivate yourself and have perseverance, have resilience, these sort of true grit ingredients that people needed to have to be successful. And the people that could fashion that, that's why so many parents back in that time, had like a strong disciplined way of raising their children, partly because it was the way they were raised, but partly they truly believed that they were fashioning resilience into their children, that the tougher they are, the stronger they are, the more they understand what failure is like, the more they'll be able to be more resilient and successful. I still remember in 1996, when I was working with Australia's Olympic swimming team, that one of the head coaches there, he was like, it's all very well for them to be successful, but we've got to show them what failure looks like. They've got to learn how to come back from failure, because until they've experienced failure and built resilience, resilience was seen as one of the most important ingredients to achieving and maintaining success. And that is also true. That is still a really significant ingredient. But I want to introduce another dimension to it, and that's this concept of early warning signals. We will unpack that in a second. But today, what we're going to talk about is, what is this concept of early warning signals? What is the linkage between them and your ID? And as a result of having this newfound level of self-awareness of your ID and the early warning signals, can that allow you to stay more in stride and therefore more impact, more successful more often? And then can the people around you somehow help as well? And that's, I could write that another way, which is the role you could play helping other people stay more in stride as well by you being more aware of this. Now, when we talk about early warning signals, some of you, or many of you, know this particular diagram. We call this the peak performance indicator. And this is a one-page snapshot of what being true to your ID, being true to yourself is all about. So I'll quickly refresh on this to level set for everybody, but then we're going to take a different angle with it. So this green arrow here represents your ID in stride on your life journey. So if you're traveling through life, some people talk about having your true north. So other people talk about being in flow, being in the zone. Athletes say, we talk about being in stride, because when people aren't this way, they often say, well, I feel very out of stride. And when you dig into that with them, what we have found is there's an absolute correlation between when you're out of stride, you're not being true to your ID. When you're in stride, there's an absolute correlation between that feeling, that success you have, and you being true to your ID, true to yourself, as the cliche would say. So when you are true to yourself and you're in stride with your ID, there are all sorts of benefits that play out in terms of your performance and the effect on your health and energy. That is when you will give your very best performance. And by best performance, I don't just mean you'll run your fastest time as an athlete or swim your fastest time, but in business, you'll make your best decisions. You'll hold your temper better. You know, at home, you'll be more present. They're the sorts of things that happen when you are really in stride. Plus, you'll have that feeling of fulfillment. A lot of people say that they're happy, but not fulfilled, or they're satisfied, but there's something lacking. There's like an emptiness. And that's because they can tell when they learn about their ID, they say, oh, I enjoy the people I work with, or I enjoy the environment, but yes, there's something missing because there's certain needs deep within me that aren't being met. The sense of achievement that you get when you're living life this way just makes you feel on fire. People shift from being engaged to thriving. And what you want in your workforce is a thriving workforce, not just an engaged workforce. Confidence and self-esteem and self-worth are all not only at their highest, but there is that resilience factor that you're more robust and your health and your energy are in great shape. People aren't born to be sick. They're born to be healthy. So when people are experiencing perpetual sickness of any form, it's normally a consequence of them being to varying degrees out of stride. The arrows here to the left and right represent the typical forces that can pull you out of stride. And sometimes it's done from a place of love. It's not because these people are malicious or these situations are malicious or anyone's doing anything with any ill intent. It's like your parents, as the family arrow here. Family is just trying to raise you and love you, maybe prevent you making the same mistakes that you made. But that doesn't mean they're raising you in a way that works for you. Society, the minute you were born, it saw that you were a boy or a girl. There were expectations right away for how you would live your life. Our education system, it's got specific ways that favor certain IDs and not others. And so it goes on. You know, you can be in a role where you're doing so well in your career. You get promoted, as they say, from the, the Peter principle, where you go from being in a role that's really good for you, you get promoted, which is all for the right reasons, but you're in a role or a situation that can pull you way out of stride. So whilst this whole principle here about your ID and peak performance is very true, and then when you get pulled out of stride, you experience forms of ill health. It starts with behavior, but it takes, as the intensity builds up, it takes more and more of a toll on your health. What we've done in the past is typically focus on the symptoms. So the symptoms here are things like this. We found that it typically falls into, well, there are many different categories, but 5 very common categories are these 5 here. When you're pulled out of stride, you know, it can really take a toll on your energy. Now, initially, it might just be that you're hitting the snooze button. But as it goes on, you can get to the point where you're not only having sleep problems, you end up going to the doctor who puts you on medication so that you can sleep better, right? So whilst energy or a little bit of fatigue can not sound too bad, if the intensity of that builds up, it can really be quite serious and significant. With immunity, it's not just colds and flus, but when people are susceptible to various viruses, we've all seen that, and I'm not putting COVID into this category. I'm not, the expert on COVID, but I do know of people who have had what starts as a virus or starts as a bronchial issue or like pneumonia or something, and next thing it escalates into something way more serious as the intensity builds up. Skin irritations. I mean, I know people on this call who either have or have got family members that have suffered terrible skin disorders. Sometimes it's something simple, like just a short-term rash. Other times it gets to the point where the skin, it gets to the point where it can even get infected, and then it can get really serious, let alone the actual discomfort that gets to a point where people don't even want to keep living when it's so uncomfortable. And they don't want to be seen in public. As someone said to me the other day, it may not be life-threatening, but it's definitely life-changing. And when it's life-changing enough, it can soon become life-threatening. Respiratory and then digestive. There's a lot of things that we all experience that we run off to doctors to get solutions for, when another way of tackling these, or at least reducing them, if not eliminating them altogether, is to get back in stride. And those of us who work with ID and have done this long enough have had many, many use cases where people's symptoms have disappeared altogether. But these are the symptoms that become quite evident, like physically evident. What we want to explore today is what are the early warning signals that start to sort of give you the light up on the dashboard of your read of yourself that says, oh, something's not right. I need to take stock or think about what's going on and maybe make some adjustments. So at the moment, what we've done when we've got all these symptoms, we've got plenty of tools to help you get back in stride. And for those of you who are new to ID, these are the sorts of tools, and these will be included with the recording when they're sent out today. But we've got many matrices like this that say, hey, if there are some needs that are missing, here's what you can do to get back in stride. We've got tools like this that say, here's to get in stride, here are specific strategies that you can use. And here's these things to watch out for, whether you're driven up on a drive, we call that driven to use, or whether you're driven to avoid an instinct. We've got these for every instinct: authenticate, complete, improvise. But these are all the tools once you're very aware that something's not working. A way of telling that is if we say on that scale of the peak performance indicator, on a scale of 0 to 10, and you can think about this today, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being you are right on that green arrow, you are in stride and thriving, and a 9 is pretty good. That's probably just on the borders of that green arrow. But as you start to go, out to the left or out to the right, it drops to the 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. When you get out to like a 4 or less, the tension of you being out of stride and frustrated and stressed is so strong that you're at a point where you're like, I can't keep doing this. Whether it's a relationship, whether it's a work role, or just a situation like, I have to make a change. So when you think about that today and you go, okay, what's my number today? On a scale of 0 to 10, what's the number that comes up for you? Just hold on to that number. What I would say to you is if you are a 9 or an 8, like an 8, 9 or 10, you may not have any symptoms. You may feel awesome about the way you're showing up today. But once you get to around a 6, you start to experience a diminishing of the things at the top, like it becomes quite evident to you. And you start to move out here on the horizontal axis where that also becomes quite evident. You can see it in your behavior. You can see it in your attitude. You might be starting to experience various forms of ill health, those symptoms I had up before. So if you are at like a 4, for example, you probably don't have to think about early warning signals. You've probably got the evidence that something's not right. But if you're at like a 7, think about today the difference between how you're operating today and what it's like when you are flying. And what are the signals that come up for you that you're not in stride? Because that's what we want to get out of today, is how to catch yourself sooner. I might just stop there and have a break in case there's any questions or comments that anybody has. Just remember, I think you're on mute. If you want to ask something, you might have to unmute yourself first. Okay, let's keep going. So as we dig into early warning signals, you might want to just keep this slide in front of you if you've got some sort of skin irritations or anything medically going on, so that you can think, okay, I've got a certain, I've got psoriasis right now. I'll just look at that. It's right in the middle. But what was the early warning signal before the psoriasis occurred? Was it something else? For example, and I'm just sharing with you here some of the things that other people have shared with us just to get your thinking started. And then I'm going to open it up and invite, discussion and contribution from all of you on the call, because we would love to help build this out for the benefit of others. And what we'll explore as we get into today is, are some of the early warning signals related to certain IDs? Like, for example, skin spots. I don't think it is, but we might find that when people talk about, I have a skin issue, it might come up that a certain ID experiences a skin issue more than others. Down the bottom, memory. People say, I find that I'm more forgetful when that's my first clue that I'm, maybe getting out of stride. Is that true of everyone? Doesn't mean everyone experiences all of these symptoms, but if you have a memory issue, is that only for a certain ID, or are there all IDs that can, experience these symptoms? So these are just some of the early warning signals. The first two happen to be mine. When I don't even realize that I might be out of stride. And sometimes I look at my hands, and I'm like, oh, there's all these spots on my hand. They're not even that uncomfortable. I just notice all these spots. But if I don't do something about that, and I'll stop and think, oh, what's going on? Have I been out of stride? And it often shows up for me a few weeks later, not in the moment. If it shows up a couple of weeks later, then I look back and I go, okay, that was having more an effect than what I realized. If I don't do something about it, those spots turn into like broken glass under my skin, and they're really annoying. My palms get all sweaty. And I don't get psoriasis, but that's what I get as a skin issue. The other one for me is sneezing twice. If I sneeze twice, it is a guarantee that I'm about to get a cold. And I've just figured that out over time. And now I have a little formula of, making a few changes, taking some vitamin C, and I'm generally able to avoid getting a cold. But that's a sign to me that something is going on. But I know other people have said, a really good friend of mine who a number of people on this call know, she has said that she doesn't normally swear, but when she starts getting pulled out of stride, she starts swearing way more than what she normally would do. Another good friend the other day said to me, Paul, what I notice is I just get distracted. I'm just not present. And I especially notice it with my kids. I love being present to my whole family, to everyone. But I can feel when I've got things that are distracting me and pulling me out of stride, and her ID was 5537. She said, I just can tell that I'm not present to the people I'm with. And, I try and catch myself with that. But I know it's to do with me being out of stride. It's not just the meeting itself is boring. I can see a pattern to it, So I'm going to stop there and just invite you guys to share. And especially if when you thought about your peak performance number today, it was, say sub 7, and you can see something coming up for you, whether it's the actual, like the evidence of being out of stride, or whether it's an early warning signal that you've experienced before and you've seen a pattern to it. It'd be great if you could share it, and I'll just write some of them down, and then we'll see if there aren't some correlations that start to show up with ID. So who would like to share? Okay, Dennis, love to hear from you.
So procrastination, specifically avoidance when things are just not in line with how you handle things based, for example, I'm 7472, and we're best when processing strategic goals aligned to, a meaningful big picture vision, right? A clear purpose, plan of attack, etc. As much information as possible. But when you don't have that, at times you're frozen and you avoid it. Then it can be crippling.
Yeah. So, can you see that even before it becomes a big issue, you just notice that you're normally like an action person, get things done, and you start procrastinating. That starts happening for you?
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because for someone with your ID, checking that list off and actually getting things done is not only a love, it's what you're probably known for, like it's who you are. So if you start procrastinating, that's definitely a sign that you're not as in stride as you could be.
Yeah, you get everything done that absolutely has to be, but many things fall by the wayside along the way. So thank you.
Have you noticed anything showing up physically, in terms of like that's motivationally, but physically in terms of whether it's skin or energy or any other sort of signal?
Yes, like aches and pains. So if I'm not staying active and being healthy, like those old injuries, they're not debilitating, but they'll resurface, right?
Okay.
That achy knee or hip that you hurt years ago but repaired through physical therapy. If you're not staying on top of your physical health, then those things will show up because the rest of your body isn't strong enough to compensate, right? Great point.
And that there is just such a partnership between the mind and the body. If the mind's not in stride, it will absolutely manifest in the body. And I think I hadn't thought about that before, but if you've got sort of nagging joint issues or old injury issues, you're absolutely right. They tend to sort of flare up again and, let you know they're still around when you get pulled out of stride. So true. Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to second what Dennis said. And it's interesting because I don't have my ID memorized, but he immediately said procrastination, which was the one I was going to say. And sure enough, we're like one number off, Dennis, you and I'm like 8372. So for me, procrastination is a really bad warning sign as well, that I'm getting either just disconnected or bored, or I don't see why I'm doing something. Physically, for sure, the aches and pains come up. It's wild, but also fatigue for me is profound when I feel really disconnected.
Thanks, Melissa. Isn't that interesting? That you would think of yourself as that person that is always motivated, able to jump in and get things done. And it's just interesting that procrastination stands out to both of you.
Yep.
Very cool. Yes, and with that fatigue, it's interesting because we get the benefit of talking to people one-on-one, and without us breaching their confidence, we can just talk publicly about what happens. But it's quite staggering how many people will say things like, I just make it through to Friday afternoon, and then I just spend most of the weekend trying to recover, get ready for Monday morning again, And I'm like, really? That's how your weekends are spent? But they're not going to make that public. But I would say that there are a lot of people, and I can't relate it to an ID as such, but that fatigue issue, they will motor through because they've got that resilience to motor through. But it is at a price, and the immunity, they're exhausted by Friday to the point where their weekend is significantly compromised. But that's the out of stride piece. We want to then catch that sooner, so you don't oscillate too far from that green arrow. Instead of going way out to the left and way out to the right, you start to think about what are those signals that catch me when I'm like a 7 or an 8. Because honestly, the people I see succeeding best, and that's why I called it the secret to success, the real secret. People don't find the magic relationship or the magic role in life or the magic family that they happen to have. What happens is people find a way of adjusting their situation to meet their needs. They're so self-aware that between them, their self-awareness and the conversations they're able to have with their partner or their children or their friends or their bosses. They're able to, manufacture a role or a situation that meets their needs. And it is possible through that level of self-awareness and that level of authenticity and vulnerability to live a life that is consistently 8 out of 10 or more. And they're the people that would say, not only do I live with success and I feel successful, but they're known that way. They're known as positive people. They're known as, having a Midas touch or whatever it might be. But it's not because they've been lucky. It's that they've learned that, how to not vacillate too much from being in stride. And whether they did that through ID or they did that through their own experiences, ID just gives you it brings the science to the art. It gives you a faster way of getting there. All right, what about some other people?
Well, I appreciate the other people bringing up the topic of fatigue, because energy has been not only my early warning signal, but also what just takes me out. I can't do anything. And I've been working on this and really believe that it has to do with my ID. And what I have, the way I define it now is my body sees stress in ways that I'm not totally aware of. So if I tell somebody that I have some stress and they say, well, stop doing the things that are stressful, I say, that's not it. It's the way that my body perceives stress. And that's what I've been working on for quite some time. That's my research project for myself.
What are your early warning signals? Can you, if fatigue is where you ultimately get to, and to the point where it debilitates you, what have you yet caught the early warning signals?
Well, I've been in the certification class, and yesterday was our third day, and it was a full day. And today, I'm okay. I don't have much energy at all.
Okay.
So today is a recovery day. And I find that when I have a day that's a big day for me, then usually the next day I have some recovery.
Okay. So what will be interesting as we go through the next month is to see and I appreciate what's happened and even why it's happened. Is there a signal that alerts you right at the beginning that you could take action on then and avoid the level of fatigue that occurs that then requires this level of recovery? Let's see if we can figure that out over the month.
Yeah, that works for me because I've been trying to figure it out.
Good.
Hey, Paul, I'm just thinking and listening to some of these. I reckon there's a big correlation here because everyone who's just spoken will all avoid improvise. And this is this shock absorber that we talk about. And I think this is where the connection is. It's between the fatigue is you keep going because you keep absorbing it. And that's the hard part. So what you're just saying there is the key is like, how do you know when you've absorbed too much? Because I think it's that you go because of obligation, because of you've got to get the commitments done, all the rest of it, just keep going. And then it's that exhaustion at the end, that fatigue, lack of interest, whatever that might be, is the price you pay. So I think if we could get our radiation suits on earlier, to know that we're absorbing too much, we need to do something quick.
So, Ian, can I play back what I think I'm hearing you say is that because you're wired as, particularly the whole ID, but in you're highlighting the avoid improvise that's come up from people sharing today, that's an instinct that just can absorb the pressure. So it looks like you're resilient because you keep going and you dig deeper and you struggle through it. And yes, you are doing it, but there's a price that's accumulating that's like a pressure cooker thing happening And then eventually it boils over, and so then there's some sort of, whether it's recovery or whatever it might be, but it's not quite as it's not quite as in stride as it appeared when you're sort of sustaining and working through, right?
Right.
Have you found a way to recognize that earlier, given your knowledge of ID?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it probably goes to sleeping, some of the tension in the shoulders, like, things like that. There's those things that start to come up first. They're sort of going, well, you're absorbing too much. Are sort of probably two of my key. There's others, but they would be two key ones.
Okay. So I'm listening to what you say, and I'm looking at the chat that's occurring, which is sort of our partner webinar that occurs all the time at the same time, right? And I'm wondering whether if, for example, what you're saying is right, that you're absorbing, and at the same time you start noticing, I'm actually wanting more coffee, right? Like, I'm just putting this together. Is that a signal that you could then go, oh, I don't normally have more than one coffee a day or two coffees a day, and the fact that I want more, that must be a signal that I'm starting to be more absorbing of the stuff instead of just being resilient, and I need to have a break or do something so I don't pay some big price at the end. What do you think, Ian? Is that possible for someone with your ID?
I think so. By the way, what I'm sipping is not coffee. It's ginger tea.
That's whiskey.
It's whiskey. Yeah, absolutely. It's nearly 8:30 a.m. But I think they're the things, and I think it's probably going to vary between people. There's definitely something like that. It's what is it that is outside what you would say normal, and particularly if you're a use complete. There's what we normally do. There's our routine. There's what we typically do. What are the things that are outside of that routine that are like, pay attention to that? And so if I'm normally saying, I have one coffee every morning, but then I go, oh, you know what? I remember a little while ago, I started having a mid-morning coffee, and I thought, this is weird. Why am I doing this? And then I started to look at some other stuff and recognized it. So there was an instance that was quite a while ago, but there's other things. And I think if everyone looks at it, and I know there's been a few comments in the chat about it, and quite a lot of commonality: use complete, avoid improvise as well. Pick what's that thing that you don't normally do that you're now doing, and that could be your early warning signal.
So that might be a good clue. Thank you for sharing that. But when Dennis and Melissa were sharing before, like, that would be an interesting thing to reflect on, because you as completers would have your routines, or if you're in stride, there would be a routine, and particularly about how you start your day and how you go through your day, and down to things like how your day plays out with things like coffees or timing of lunch and what you have, the whole nutrition piece. And when that might change, that could give you a clue. So that's like the whole point here, is catching it sooner.
Actually, Paul, that's a very good point, if I may. When we first started using the early warning system, they started because people were telling their tale of woe or their issue of what was an issue with them. And they were talking about when it was already gotten so big that they had to have a solution. And we were asking questions like, well, what happened before that? And what happened before that? And that's how you track it back, right? And we have found that most of the time, the earliest warning signal is where your attention goes. And it's what you're focusing on. It happens mind first. It's you're out of stride first in your heart and in your body, in your mind. And then that attention then leads you to start picking up different clues. And then that starts working your defense systems. And then eventually it goes to, thoughts. And then you go, oh my God, this guy's an idiot. And then you go basically to speech, and then you get out to, raging. And so, when someone says to you, oh, my early warning signal is my throat's sore from yelling, you're going, oh, there was probably one before that. Before you started yelling, what did you do? So I'd like to invite people to look at the continuum of like, well, keep working back when you think you've got the early warning signal. Well, what was happening before that? What was happening? And then you're on a lovely scale. And sometimes you catch it too late, but you catch it. I'm telling you, then you catch it a bit earlier. And pretty soon you're catching it before it starts.
So Greg, just make that a little more real for us. Can you talk about your situation, like for you, because you got a really different idea to some of the ones that are being shared. Can you show us for you how it goes from, because what I'm hearing you say is it sort of starts with thoughts, or it starts with the mind first and then works its way through to becoming something more physical, maybe? It starts, tell us how that works for you.
It starts in feelings, and not only that, you can relate it back to the ID. So I'll use my 8. For those of you who knew, that's an authenticate drive, and that's the need to make things real, make them useful, and to not waste time. So my 8 fires off. First thing, I won't even know it till all of a sudden I notice I'm doodling or my mind's wandering. I'm not finding this useful. I'm not finding a way to be participating. So what I'll do is start daydreaming, or I'll think of sarcastic comments if I'm not active. The best thing to do, of course, is then get active, and so ask a question or look for who needs to speak next or engage. And for my down 2, that need to be flexible and free in movement. If I feel trapped or I feel like I just don't have any choices, I'll notice that my mind starts going to daydreaming again or looking for a way out. So I love sort of relating people's IDs to their first early warning signals. And the more you get tuned into them, the sooner you can change your behavior. Does that help?
Yes. And then where does it go from there for you? Does it become physical, or you're able to catch it at that point?
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So now it gets ugly, right? So if I don't catch it soon enough, then my first out loud version, my physical one will be, you'll just see me look really still or check out, but my mind's gone somewhere. My language one is often sarcasm. So it's like, all right, yeah, of course, right? So I'll be sarcastically referring to what we could be doing now, or where I'm not being useful, and make some smart ass comment. And ironically enough, the other one for me is just go quiet and go, screw this for a joke. I'm going to the movie. I'm going to the movies in here, right?
Right.
And then I call it reach for the gun. Then I'll if it gets really worse than that, I'll have to do something, and that's when let me get it. I'll grab it. So then it's just bombastic. So if people meet me for the first time and they've seen me out of stride, they go, gee, what a pushy guy. Other people go, wow, he sure is patient, because my focus is on them and my attention's on the solution. When my focus is on me being lost, hurt, dismissed, you don't want to be around me.
Yeah. I won't ask how it gets any worse from there, Greg.
That's when you look on websites how to remove blood from carpet stains. That's it.
No, but you taught us something. For those of you on the call, it was Greg, years ago, we had this conversation and you raised this concept of catching this whole point of being out of stride, catching it sooner with the early warning signals. And there's so much value to this. But it takes a bit of work to really figure it out, because once it becomes evident, it's easy to work out because it's right in front of you, but it's sort of too late. By then you could have damaged your brand, damaged the relationship, damaged your health, and obviously, especially when you're in leadership positions, you don't want to have to pay that price. You want to catch it a lot sooner. And we're all in leadership positions, by the way. You don't want to affect any relationship, whether it's at home or at work. And so I think this idea of being able to catch it sooner and stay giving your best self all the way through is really hugely valuable.
Well, right. One last thing, Paul. There's some categories. When you're early morning, I call it inner talk, your inner voice. And some people make some great comments there. If your inner voice is criticizing, it can be criticizing yourself. You're starting to beat up yourself, or the inner voice can go like it starts beating up other people. That's a sign that you're moving out of stride. My inner voice tends to beat up other people. My wife's inner voice tends to beat up herself. So you'll tend to find that you'll hook up with people whose first early warning signals are self-deprecation, and the other ones is blame, right? And it makes for interesting relationships.
Well, and if you're a verifier, you tend to do both, Greg. And not really either or. While you're beating up someone else, you're beating the hell out of yourself. Like the self-criticism is pretty strong. Yeah. All right. Is there someone else who's got another angle to this, another experience they've had, maybe from a different ID? We haven't really heard from many verifiers yet. We've heard, or an improviser even.
Can I jump in there, Paul?
Yeah, go, Susan.
Yeah. Yeah, my early warning sign, and I wasn't aware of it, is to sigh. And people would say to me, "What's wrong?" I go, "Nothing." And they go, "Yeah, but you just sighed." And I go, "Oh, okay." And then I became acutely aware of when that was happening. And what I learned from that was, and a little bit to what Greg was saying, what comes first? Is it the emotion or is it the thought? And so I would think, okay, what am I feeling? Because the sighing was frustration. And so I could attach the emotion of frustration to it. And then I would think, okay, well, what am I actually thinking about at that point? And so that would be rewinding back just that, I guess, nanosecond to get to what the thought was. So that's where, that's the challenge, is actually, okay, what was I really thinking in that instant before I went into the sighing? So
okay, thank you. Isn't it interesting how it's as simple as something like that, but I can not so much relate to it myself, but as you share that, I can think of people where that is the case. And I wrote that one in there about speech where people, it'll be like the so whether it's a sigh, or there are people I know when they're not as on point, they use a lot more in their language, and they may not realize it, like you said about the sigh, you don't realize in it, but other people listening to them, it sounds much more tentative when they talk like that, and they're not as confident, for example, and therefore not as in stride. All right, one more. Okay, well then let's move on to the next. Well, actually, before we move on, I just want to clarify. This is maybe another dimension I wasn't thinking of beforehand. But are we saying that there's a pathway of how this plays out from thoughts to emotions to behavior to health? Is that pretty much what we're saying? Because that, if that is the journey, and I'm not sure if that's like precisely right, but it's a really great framework to be able to explore your own experience and say, okay, well, I can see the health symptoms. So before the health symptoms, it shows out somehow in my behavior. So let's say that's the sigh, that's a behavior. The procrastination, that's a behavior. The stuttering or the that's a behavior. So what's the emotion before that, and then what's the thoughts and the mindset before that? Because if you can get right back to that place, you won't be vacillating very much at all from being in stride if you can catch yourself. And the really nice thing is, I don't think there are 100 different early warning signals for each person. Most people just need to find one or two, and that's it. When they see them show up or other people point them out, they're like, you know what? Thank you. I love that I catch myself sooner. But I think that would be a great piece to add to the framework, that there is that sort of journey of how they manifest. Greg, is that? I just looked to you because you raised that. Would you agree with that sort of pathway?
Yeah, I actually, just for everyone else, I just wrote the scale down that we tend to use. Which goes it goes from internal to external. And if anyone's familiar with Dr. Robert Sapolsky's work, you'll know that he can actually relate the part of the brain you're using with each stage now. And this has been some stuff I've been studying the last 6 months or so. And so it's like some sense comes into you, some inputs comes in, and you get a perception, and then your midbrain goes, oh no, threat or wonderful, right? Or neutral. Those are your three choices, right? And then if it says threat, it sends to the brainstem, go attack, fight, hide, run away, right? It goes to, oh, that's curious. If it's curious, it goes to the frontal cortex, which is, what's going on here? So you can actually track what you're doing. And the more you get away from your thoughts, the more physical it gets. And that's when we start lashing out, So you're spot on with this. And then you do it over enough long period of time, and then it's a health issue. So when someone finally says, I've got a skin problem, you go, dude, you had a problem well before that, right? So let's see if we can track it back. Right.
So I would just add then the health symptoms to the end of what the pathway you put in the chat, because a lot of people, when they're new to this, they sort of work from right to left. You know, it's harder to figure out there might be an issue in the thought side of it. But the health is quite evident, and then the behavior can be more evident. So it can be sometimes easier to work from the end, work backwards, to then dig in and find what is the thought change or the internal dialogue that's occurring that makes that's that early morning signal. I think it's really, really helpful. Thank you for sharing that, guys. All right, so let's talk now about if there's a connection to your ID. You know, when we look at that second part of what we were going to cover today, how does your ID impact these? So for those of you who raised it, you know, like when you think about, if I go right back to the beginning when Dennis and Melissa were talking about procrastination, for example, or some of you can talk about fatigue, but is there a connection to your ID and the early warning signals that are coming up? Are they peculiar to certain IDs? Is sleep, you know, I'm not sure that they are, but there might be some that come up that are more peculiar to certain IDs, or what might happen like as a result. For example, becoming critical of people might be a more verifier thing, or it could be anyone that does that. I thought, Greg, when you raised about sarcasm, see, I would think that sarcasm is normally like my territory, you know, as an avoid authenticate, because we say things we don't mean. We do that just for fun. So I would have thought sarcasm was a more natural place to go for the avoid authenticate, but maybe the fact that it's not where an authenticator lives is why it would be, you know, what plays out. So I'm curious, for those of you who are aware of some of these early warning signals and you see your ID, can you see a connection between your strongest drives and whether those signals are, you know, at the very beginning with the thoughts, or whether they're manifesting now on the health side? Can you see that connection? Who's got something they could share there? I might just reiterate, Greg, I'll use your example when you were starting. What I heard you say was even things like, oh, well, where mine's correlated is when I'm feeling trapped, you know, and then I'll want to shut down and disengage. That's what causes it. That's not necessarily the early warning signal, but the fact that you need to do something, you know, that if you're restrained from doing, like physically doing, you know, is there something that comes up there early warning signal wise that you can, is it a fidgetiness, or, you know, it's something that comes up that you can see is probably more connected to your stronger drives? Anyone
Well,
have
I'll add something.
Yes,
Just
Susan?
just with the improvised drive, if I don't have that sense of freedom to be able to do and be what I want to do, then I would get the sighing will happen. So I'll get frustrated and the sighing will happen, and then it will develop. And I've noticed as some past experience that, you know, I am prone to getting asthma, worst case. So that's what can develop. And I've known other people with a similar drive who also presented those types of symptoms. So I think the breathing piece is really important for me to be able to feel like I can breathe.
You know, well, I'll let other people share before I make a comment. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries. Thank you.
See, I think there might be another angle to this connection with ID. It's not so much that there's a correlation between the signal and the ID, but where does your ID even get in the way of recognizing it? So when I was preparing this, I thought about my ID and I thought, well, as a verifier, so my ID is 8147. For those of you who don't know, I should have put that right in the top here. And as a verifier, it's very easy for me to justify why there's nothing wrong that I need to change anyway. You know, so if I am out of stride, I can justify, oh yeah, but, you know, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing that. And, you know, that's how it needs to be right now. That's the verified drive at play. So instead of being aware of my early warning signals or the fact that I might be being pulled out of stride, I often pride myself on the fact that it's my verified drives that gives me that perspective and perseverance and resilience to keep going forward, because no matter what's coming up, I'll find a way to work through it, you know? And those early warning signals could be like they're knocking on the door, and if I was more attentive, I could hear them, but instead I'm justifying why I need to be doing what I'm doing. And so my verified drive, as much as it's a strength and it's part of my success formula, it can also be one of my demons working against me and blocking me from seeing what could be right in front of my face. When I thought about that for the improvisers, for example, improvisers are blessed with an optimistic view of the world. You know, they've got this eternal optimism, and that's wonderful as the strength. But the corresponding demon of that is you look at life through rose-colored glasses, and you therefore, you know, keep seeing the positives, even though it's not only the glass isn't half full, the glass is like near on empty, but no, at least there's water there, you know, look how much room there is to fill it up. We'll go and find more water, instead of facing the reality of what might actually be happening. So the very strength and, you know, positivity of your ID can actually prevent you from seeing those early warning signals. And that's like, Ian, you raised the example of the avoid, improvise. Their strength is to persevere through the struggle, like that they can absorb all of that pressure. That's a strength. But the downside, and we're seeing this in a lot of our frontline workers now, look how much publicity is building around the fatigue factor in a very dangerous way with all of our frontline workers right now. They've been, for the last 2.5 years, they've been absorbing. And I know from the work I've done with them that the vast majority are strong avoid improvisers. So that absorption is just like now at bursting point. So it's a wonderful talent that they can absorb and keep persevering through the struggle, but it's blocking them from seeing the early warning signals and maybe catching things sooner. And that's where I'm seeing a more obvious connection with ID, is where the ID can actually be working against you. Your ID can be working against you because it's keeping you going. You're drawing on it for that perseverance and resilience instead of taking stock and making a course correction sooner. And when we come back into the ID masterclass, we haven't got time to dig into this today, but we will look at that, because if that is one of the, you know, if there is this sort of, you know, vulnerability from our ID that it blinds us to the early warning signals, it'll be really, like, this is part of the masterclass nuance piece. It'll be really terrific to dig into that and go, okay, even though that part of me wants to keep, you know, I can justify why it's happening, I can keep going. What is the nuance that I can override that so that I catch myself sooner and therefore stay more in stride?
That reminds me of the a term that's used in many self-development programs called the shadow side.
Yes. Yeah, and we talk about vulnerability. Like, obviously there's strengths, there's vulnerabilities of every ID, and there's also, in terms of the shadow side, I mean, it's very obvious with your driven to use a drive that the shadow side of the avoid is the area that's not as familiar. And that's the value of understanding ID and then collaborating with others. But we haven't really explored the vulnerability of your ID, you know, tripping you up from these early warning signals. That's a really interesting dimension. And I see it for all drives. You know, I see for the completers how, you know, so many times what's obvious to me is divorce. With, you know, completers I know that have gone through a divorce, and they'll say, you know, I knew years ago, but it was a small issue. It was a small issue. And they just kept persevering because they wanted to see it as an exception. and they didn't want to break the routine of of the journey they were on, the life plan they had. And when it ultimately breaks and there's all that catastrophe, then they go, I probably could have dealt with it back when it was a smaller issue instead of waiting for it to become irreparable, And there's many people over the years who've said, if I'd have known about ID 30 years ago, I still would have married the same person. I can see we're actually good friends now, et cetera, et cetera. But if I'd have known that, I could have caught some things sooner, dealt with them while they're more manageable, and maybe it might have been a different outcome. It's that's a key thing. The avoid verifiers who don't like confrontation sweep things under the carpet. And those things they're sweeping under the carpet can be the things that they should be dealing with. If they're smaller, they're going to be a lot less confrontational when they're smaller. So I can see where the very strengths of our IDs trip us up from actually addressing the early warning signals, even though they're like lights flashing on the dashboard. It's like when they say, you're running out of petrol and you go, yeah, but I know this car. I know I've really got another 50 Ks. I can make it through, so we keep persevering. And we do, but maybe there's a price that's accruing that we're going to end up paying. So we will dig into that when we do the masterclass and see if we can't find some ways forward. We probably won't solve them for every ID, but if we solve them for a few IDs, the formula that we come up with might then help others extrapolate that for themselves. And then the last question that we had today, which we're going to run out of time for, was what others around you can do to help you. I think the first thing I would just say to you with that is share it. Once you come up with what happens for you, like Susan, when you said about, the sigh, if like you share that with people so you can say, hey, some of these things I may not even see them, but please call them out for me so that I can be more aware. Even though when it happens in the moment, often we don't want to see it that way. And I think the first thing I would say is just share that. Be vulnerable enough and authentic enough to share that with other people who are closest to you, and they can then help you stay more on track. It's like giving them permission to call you out on it so that they can help you, be more accountable to your own formula for success.
Hey, Paul, can I just ask people who want to do a little exercise between now and next session? Just look at the difference. Look for your internal early warning signals. Watch the next couple of weeks. What do I know inside before anyone else knows what's going on? And what are my external ones? What are ones other people are going to see? And it's going to be obvious. Just that one, those buckets, internally, feelings, thoughts, internal dialogue, and externals. And you're going to see some fun stuff.
That's really good, Greg. Thank you for your input today, Greg. It's always valuable. Thank you for all of you who put comments in the chat. That's a really rich part of our session. And thank you for showing up today and what you shared. And I hope you're all then taking away something that you can continue to work on. You're all welcome back at the ID Masterclass. Please don't think that it's an elite group or that it's only for people who've done a certain amount of training. It's for everyone, but we do dig into more of the nuances because the people who come along do care about understanding ID at that level. So hopefully we will see you then. Until then, stay in stride. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody.